A Canadian sniper single-handedly takes on an entire squad of Nazi SS members. He is at a clear disadvantage, but he will not stop fighting until he runs out of ammunition. One by one, his enemies fall to the bullets of his rifle. He thought that all the Nazis had been eliminated, but one of them had one last surprise for him. With his last strength, a dying German manages to activate an incendiary grenade that explodes right in front of the Allied soldier's eye. When his superiors informed him that the war was over for him, he replied, "No, it's not over. I'm a sniper. I just need an eye." This is just a small part of the incredible story of Léo Major, a Canadian fighter undeservedly forgotten by history. During the last years of World War II, he was responsible for enormous feats. One of them was the liberation of an entire city without any help. His actions were so astonishing that many doubt if they ever happened, but the evidence speaks for itself. That's why today, in this new episode of Military History, we'll tell you all about Léo Major, the one-eyed ghost. The youth of this sniper is mostly a mystery. It is known that he was born in the American city of New Bedford, Massachusetts, although he moved to Montreal, Canada, before he was 1 year old. In his teens, due to a terrible relationship with his father, he moved in with his aunt. No other details are known about this man until 1940. At that time, World War II had already spilled a terrifying amount of blood. Adolf Hitler's Nazis had surprised the entire planet with the effectiveness and lethality of their forces. Much of Europe was in their clutches, including countries such as Poland, Norway, Holland, and France. The United Kingdom, the only rival left standing, was on the ropes. But alongside the British Crown, there were other nations that offered their help to the desperate English, such as Australia, India, and Canada. When the opportunity to join the army came knocking, Major didn't think twice. He felt that this would be the perfect opportunity to prove his father his worth. In time, he would prove to be right. Despite his enthusiasm, he had to wait several years before he could go into action. However, when he did, it was in one of the most impressive operations of the entire Second World War. On June 6, 1944, more than 130,000 Allied soldiers landed on the French coast of Normandy to take the battle to the heart of Nazi-occupied territory. Transport ships invaded 5 different beaches, dividing them by country. The Canadians were assigned the objective called Juno.
Kaum am Strand werden die Männer von einer fast vollständig intakten deutschen Verteidigung ins Visier genommen. Was folgt, ist ein unglaubliches Massaker.
The invasion was one of the bloodiest in history, with tens of thousands killed in just a few hours. But despite the extremely high cost in lives, the mission was a success, and the Germans were forced to retreat. Léo Major reached the beaches with his infantry unit, christened the Boiler Regiment, and was one of the lucky survivors. Despite the victory, the work of the Allied soldiers continued. Major was assigned a reconnaissance mission in a nearby town, which he had to carry out alone. Due to his great skill with weapons, his superiors selected him as a sniper, as he had been trained to work alone. This was demonstrated when during this mission, he captured a German vehicle on his own, along with its crew. Inside, he found secret codes very valuable to his side. A few days later, he found himself engaged in combat with an SS patrol. This was the largest paramilitary organization in the Nazi regime, and certainly the cruelest. It was made up of the most fanatical members of the party, who did not hesitate to kill and die for their Führer. But despite their brutality, Major was able to shoot down 4 of the patrol by himself. However, before he fell, one of the German soldiers managed to light an incendiary phosphorus grenade, which hit the Canadian in the eye. The flames burned him completely. Despite the efforts of the medical staff, there was no remedy. Half of his vision had been reduced to ashes. While he was being treated, his superiors informed him that he would be sent home again. He had fought bravely and honorably. All of Canada was proud of him, but his participation in the war was over. Many soldiers would have eagerly accepted this opportunity to escape the fighting, but Léo Major was not one of them. It was here that he declared his historic phrase, which would mark the birth of his mythical figure. "It is not over. I am a sniper. I only need one eye." Impressed, his superiors authorized him to return to action. To cover his eye, he began wearing an eye patch that he grew fond of. He said it made him look like a pirate. On October 2nd, 1944, he fought again representing his country, this time in the Battle of the Scheldt estuary. This was the name given to the operations carried out in northern Belgium and southern Holland by the 1st Canadian Army, of which the Cauldron Regiment was a part. This campaign was of vital importance, since if successful, the Belgian port of Antwerp would pass into Allied hands. This way, they would have a way of bringing supplies and equipment by sea directly to the battlefront, in addition to taking a key naval base from the Germans.
That was the dirtiest job we had during the whole war, was taking the Scheldt. The weather was rotten, cold, snow, rain, and no place to get warm or dry.
It was in this battle that Major accomplished one of his greatest feats, and one of the most impressive of the entire war. Together with his comrade and friend, Corporal Wilfred Arsenault, they were assigned to a reconnaissance mission. They were to find out what had happened to a company of recruits missing in action after being sent to capture a nearby town. Unfortunately, Arsenault fell ill shortly before the operation was due to begin. However, rather than call off the operation, Major decided to go alone. After all, his rifle was all the company he needed. It wasn't long before he came across the abandoned equipment of the missing soldiers. This led him to surmise that they had been captured. However, as he prepared to return to his base and report the information he had gathered, a heavy rain began to fall. Wanting shelter from the water and the cold, and fearing being taken by surprise by the Germans, Major decided to take shelter in a house and wait for the weather to improve. At that moment, he spotted a pair of German soldiers walking outside. Not wanting to miss this opportunity, he emerged from his hiding place and headed towards them. He silently captured one of the Nazis, and then using him as bait, managed to capture the other. By interrogating them, he was able to find out the whereabouts of the entire unit. What would another soldier do in his position? He would surely return to his base and report the situation to his superiors, and then prepare an attack. But Major had other plans. With his 2 prisoners, he headed to the position of the German officer in command of the village garrison. He convinced him that he was just one of hundreds of Canadian soldiers in the area who were at that very moment lying in wait. The commander, without the slightest idea that his enemy was lying, decided to surrender along with his entire company, except for 3 men who were shot down by the sniper. In this way, Léo Major had managed to capture approximately 100 of the enemy single-handedly. But the danger was not over. Returning to his base, SS troops sheltering in nearby houses spotted the Canadian and his large group of prisoners. Without hesitation, they opened indiscriminate fire on their former comrades in arms, as they looked down on anyone who surrendered to the enemies of the Reich. 7 of them were killed by German fire, and several others were wounded. Major ran with the survivors back to his base until he came across a Canadian tank, which held off the SS forces. When the danger passed, he continued marching until he reached his position, carrying with him 93 captured Germans. Of course, Canadian officials sought to reward him for this incredible feat. He was chosen to receive the Distinguished Conduct Medal, which was awarded to those who showed great bravery on the battlefield. However, when he learned that the award was to be presented to him by Field Marshal Bernard Montgomery, he refused to accept it, as he considered him, in his words, to be completely incompetent. The Battle of the Scheldt ended on November 8, 1944, with an Allied victory. The port of Antwerp was in their hands, and Germany's position continued to worsen by the day. By 1945, American and British forces were deep inside German territory, and while they were approaching from the west, the Soviets were rapidly advancing from the east, heading straight for Berlin. The Germans had lost their most experienced fighters, and now most of their units were made up of teenagers and the elderly. Even though Nazi defeat seemed imminent, their armies continued to fight savagely. motivated by their most fanatical men. The orders from the Nazi leadership were to fight to the last drop of blood. Surrender was strictly forbidden.
On the British and Canadian front, the offensive launched southeastwards from the Nijmegen area smashes away into Germany. This region contains the first layer of the Siegfried defenses. British and Canadian armor burst into the outer belt of concrete pillboxes in the teeth of stiffening enemy resistance.
Despite continuing to receive offers to return home for his missing eye, Léo Major continued to see action. By February 1945, the Cauldron Regiment's fighting was concentrated in the town of Keppeln, Germany. While Major was helping a military chaplain load the bodies of the fallen into a transport, the vehicle hit an explosive mine. His companion and the driver were killed, and the Canadian was blown into the air. He ended up suffering broken ankles and several ribs, as well as wounds throughout the rest of his body. He was rushed to a field hospital, where doctors had to administer morphine injections every 15 minutes to ease his pain. Although ordered by doctors to stay off the front until he recovered, Major escaped from the hospital, risking being declared a deserter. He knew the war was nearing its end, and he did not want to miss the opportunity to participate in the last battles of the war. By April 1945, much of Europe had been liberated. Only a few strongholds remained in places like the Netherlands, Italy, and Germany, although these were swarming with Nazi soldiers. The resistance was still fierce. The Boiler Regiment was ordered to capture the Dutch town of Zwolle, which had a strong German presence. When the unit commander asked for 2 volunteers to scout the area and possibly contact the local resistance, Major and Corporal Arsenault immediately volunteered. They had already flown many such missions, but to avoid unnecessary deaths, the 2 soldiers agreed to try to liberate the town themselves. However, the situation quickly began to deteriorate. On April 13th, on his way into Zwolle, Arsenault accidentally gave away his position and was shot down by German soldiers. Major managed to kill 2 of the attackers, but the rest fled in a vehicle. Although he was enraged by the death of his friend, the sniper managed to control his emotions. Determined to continue the mission, he entered the German-held town. Just as in France the previous year, the Canadian captured a German driver outside a tavern. He then forced him into the building, where his officer was, and disarmed him. Once there, he convinced the German that an Allied attack on Zwolle was imminent, and that no mercy would be shown to any Nazis found in the town. After this, he freed them both. His plan was to have them return to the German positions and spread the lie, sowing chaos among them. Fortunately for him, this worked perfectly. Major was as skilled with lies as he was with weapons.
Major wanted to properly avenge his fallen friend, and he then began running around the city, firing his machine gun and throwing grenades, simulating the army barrage by himself. Major also burned down the Gestapo headquarters in the area and engaged with furious SS officers, defeating 4 men and uncovering a team of German soldiers disguised as Dutch resistors. Throughout the night, Léo Major captured over 50 Germans, 8 to 10 at a time, who all followed the soldier, believing that the entire Canadian army had stormed into the city.
Major was a one-man army, but he carried with him the destructive force of hundreds. He was also able to carry out the main objective of his mission, which was to make contact with the Dutch resistance. By convincing them to take to the streets, the German chaos and confusion increased even further. By the next day, the Germans believed that defending Zwolle was no longer worth the effort, so they abandoned the city completely. Thus, Léo Major, nicknamed the One-Eyed Ghost, single-handedly liberated the Dutch settlement. The Boiler Regiment was able to enter the city without encountering any resistance. Major even managed to collect the body of his friend, Corporal Arsenault, from the farm where he had died and bring it back behind Canadian lines. For these heroic actions, he was again selected for the Distinguished Conduct Medal. This time, Marshal Montgomery would not be the one to award it to him, so the soldier agreed to be awarded it. It should be mentioned, however, that there are some historians who doubt the veracity of this account. According to them, Major found that Zwolle had already been almost completely abandoned by the Germans. Only a few stragglers remained, who at no time showed any intention of fighting. The Gestapo building that was set on fire was apparently the work of the Germans themselves. who sought to burn incriminating documents. Thus, Major was simply driven by a Dutch resistance car through the streets of the city to spread the word that the citizens had been liberated. He then returned to his base and reported that Zwolle was in their hands. Whatever the true version, there is no doubt that Léo Major was instrumental in driving out the German garrison. The locals made him an honorary citizen of Zwolle and even named an avenue after him. After the Nazi surrender and the end of the conflict in Europe on May 8, 1945, the Canadian returned home. But that wasn't the last time he saw action. Always eager to serve his country, he took part in the Korean War, where he was once again awarded the Distinguished Conduct Medal for the capture of an important hill. He lived to be 87, passing away on October 12, 2008, leaving behind an incredible legend. We've reached the end of the video and we want to ask you, what surprises you the most about Léo Major's story? Leave us your answer in the comments box below. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel to learn about many more military events that left their mark on history.